Welcome to the Malt Miller YouTube channel, Homebrewers. This video is an incredibly special video for us because today, Rob and I are going to be brewing a recipe that was designed by you.
A couple of weeks back, we put out a series of posts, mainly on Instagram, about building a recipe. So our audience chose the recipe, they chose the ingredients, including the malt, hops and yeast, and the brewing system that we're now going to brew this beer on. I can't wait to get going.
We put out these posts onto Facebook and Instagram and the engagement was off the charts. We literally had hundreds of responses. And what was really cool is, as Rob said, you all chose the different components in the beer style, and actually it's been up to us to design the recipe and balance all of those things. So we'll dive into that in a minute, but first and foremost, we want to say a huge thank you to everybody that got involved, commented. You know, there were people replying to each other, and some familiar faces on there, some less familiar faces. I really can't wait to see how this beer turns out.
Actually, it just goes to show how much fun recipe design can actually be. It's a fantastic part of the brewing process. So the recipe that you all chose was an English IPA, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's the thing I love about that is it's a recipe that a style that actually I've not got a huge amount of experience brewing. Have you?
Yeah, I've brewed a few. Yeah, I've brewed a few back in the day. It's not something that I've done recently. One of the things that I'm really pleased about is it's actually, obviously it's a bloody ancient style, but we can modernise it slightly with some of the ingredients that have been chosen, so that's great.
Yeah, and take some of the learnings actually that we've got from brewing more modern versions of like West Coast style IPAs and bring that into like our recipe design. So I've got my Mac in front of me and I've got our recipe in BrewZilla. Just a brief overview of the ingredients that were chosen. So for the malt bill, there were two malts chosen for this style. We've got extra pale Maris Otter from Crisp and Crystal Heritage malt from Simpsons, which actually that works really nicely for the style, because when you look at the composition of an English IPA within, say, the BJCP style guidelines or in Brewing Classic Styles, which we referred to as well for this, you want a cleaner malt bill than maybe you would for some other sort of traditional English styles like an ESB or
yeah, it's not just a stronger ESB, is it?
No,
definitely
that's
not what we're heading for.
And so that extra pale Maris Otter is going to work really nicely for us because it's going to bring a light colour but also subtle malty tones as it's a Maris Otter.
Also, whilst we looked at the two references that James has just talked about, we're not rigidly sticking to that. No. So we're doing a more modern interpretation of that style. We didn't have to be stuck to those BJCP guidelines. No,
and you know, our ABV range for the style is kind of from 5% up to 7.5%. We've landed at sort of 5.6.
Yeah.
So we want it a touch stronger than, you know, the very bottom of the style guidelines, but not so strong that like you get sort of fusel alcohol kind of notes.
Definitely don't want them, James.
No. And then we're with the Crystal Heritage malt from Simpsons. We're approaching that with a bit of caution. Okay, so we're using it because actually it's what you chose, and we think it'll work really well. But we're only using 5% of the overall grist. Yeah. So in the recipe, it's going to be 230 grams. We're shooting for a 20-litre batch on this as well. So we've got 4.4 kilos of extra pale Maris Otter rather, and 230 grams of that Crystal Heritage from Simpsons, which will just sort of darken the colour a touch, give us a little bit of like caramel and toffee notes, which we want within the style, but not too much.
It's also important, mash temperature and yeast choice is really important on this, because we need to have malt sweetness in there, but it doesn't want to be a sweet beer, so it needs to fully attenuate, and mash temperature was important on here.
Yeah, so we're going to be mashing at 65 degrees. Our original gravity that we're shooting for is 1055, and our planned final gravity is going to be around about 1012, maybe 1011. So it's going to have a little bit of sweetness, like you say, but ultimately it's going to be really drinkable.
Yeah, that's
and sort of kind of want to be able to go back more for more and more of this beer.
We don't want it to be in any way cloying.
No. That leads us on nicely to IBUs, right? So we're balancing our IBUs with our gravity points. The IBU range for the style is between 40 and 60.
Yeah, that's a big range.
It is.
Yeah.
And again, we're sort of approaching it with a little bit of caution. We want it bitter. So we're going for 46 IBUs. And the way we're going to be doing that is using the hops that you chose in 3 different ways.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, James, with the hop choice. This is where we can kind of like modernise our interpretation of this beer, because the hops that were chosen were traditional East Kent Goldings.
Yep.
Less traditionally, because it's a relatively new English hop variety, Harlequin, and also UK Cascade.
Yeah.
Now, that's a fantastic palette for us to play with.
It really is, absolutely. And we're going to be using all 3 of those at different stages. So we're going to use EKG for our bittering addition. That's going to get us to about 20 IBUs. Harlequin's going to go in 10 minutes before the end of the boil. And then we're going to do a 80-degree whirlpool with the UK Cascade. Now, we're not doing any dry hopping on this because this style doesn't actually cool traditionally for a dry hop. So we're not deviating from the original kind of style brewing preferences for this type of beer, but layering in that UK Cascade on a big whirlpool is
going to be delicious.
Yeah, really, really good. And it should leave us with a really pleasant amount of malt character as well as hop presence, but we are not basically making a West Coast IPA with English hops.
No, I've tried that, James. In fact, I used Bramlin Cross, did exactly that. West Coast IPA, just using Bramlin Cross, and yeah, it wasn't. It was a bit of a failure for me.
Let's jump into yeast. So we asked you for kind of 2 different yeast options. We asked you for a liquid yeast and a dry yeast. Predominantly the beer that we're going to be brewing with today and showcasing is the version that's going to be using a dry yeast. And the yeast choice was actually Lanneman's Verdant IPA strain, which
we've had great fun using it.
And actually, I was so pleased when that came out, because when we went down and did our video project with Verdant, we were sat in the tap room with the owners of Verdant the night before we shot our film with James the next day and with Sam. And we were working our way through the lineup on the bar, and we started with some of their cask beers.
Yeah.
And I had an awesome conversation with James about how they use that yeast to brew their cask traditional beer styles. And they were stunning. So
absolutely, the yeast character in those beers was absolutely awesome. It's going to fit in with this so well.
And importantly, those beers were pin bright.
Yeah, they were.
You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
We associate that yeast with modern sort of pale ales and IPAs that are, you know, really thick and juicy and tons of haze in them. And the yeast does contribute to that, but it is a traditional English yeast strain. Its heritage goes all the way back to London Ale 3, which is, as the name said, it's a London Ale yeast strain. So if we can end up with a pin bright beer that's got some of that yeast character balanced with the hops and the malts, we could be onto a winner.
Importantly, with the dry yeast version, so we're right on the edge of the pitch-in viability of 1 packet. We're using 2 packets of Verdant in this.
Yes, because it can be a little bit fickle at times, so we want to give it the best possible chance of fully attenuating, because we want it to attenuate really strongly.
It's a must in this beer.
Yeah. We are going to be brewing a second batch on a different system today that's just going to be sat in the background doing its own thing, and we're going to use the liquid yeast choice in that, which was Yeast's West Yorkshire strain. So at the end of this, we're going to be able to sort of do some comparison side by side between the 2 yeast strains and see actually which one kind of shows up more character, which, you know, how they differ, all of that kind of stuff. So it's going to be really interesting.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Now, very lastly, just to touch on water, your favourite topic, Rob.
No, it's not.
So we're using BrewZilla to plan our recipe, and we are using the English IPA water profile within BrewZilla. So if you're going to brew this beer yourself, we suggest using exactly the same target water profile. Adjust your water accordingly.
I just keep my eyes open at this point.
This guy, I will break him on water. It'll be his favourite topic by Christmas, I promise.
Back to more exciting stuff, James. We're actually brewing this on a BrewZilla, which was also the system that was chosen by you. I love brewing on the BrewZilla. Nice and simple. We can get the mash sorted, we can get that going, and I can pop back into the office and get a bit more work done.
Yeah, okay, because I am a big distraction when it comes to making demands on your time for videos.
Yeah, love it.
Anyway, just a brief overview then. So we're going to aim for a finished ABV of 5.6%, starting gravity 1055, finishing gravity around 1012. EBC is low, it's 13.4, which again, the range there is sort of 12 up to 28. This is a little bit of inspiration from sort of the modern way of making West Coast paler, right? Yeah. IBU is 46, and our bittering units to gravity units is nicely balanced at about 0.8, okay? So I'm really excited about this, Should we get doughed in?
Yeah, let's get doughed in.
Our strike water was added to the BrewZilla and heated up to 67 degrees, just above the mash temperature to allow for the drop in temperature once we doughed in. We added all of our water additions, which in this case was some acid to acidify the mash, and also a few brewing salt. You'll need to work this out for yourself and how you prefer to approach water. We targeted Brewfather's preference for an English IPA, and it was on to doughing in. Nice and simple because of the all-grain recipe kit that we've built for this beer. Slow and steady wins the race as ever, making sure to add our malt in 2 or 3 batches, giving it a really good stir before adding the top plate and the temperature probe for the secondary Bluetooth temperature probe, which you can connect to the BrewZilla for a far more accurate reading on the mash. It's important that in the BrewZilla settings you choose this as your primary temperature probe during the mash. And also make sure you've got the PID setting turned on so that the BrewZilla can work everything out for you during the mash. And we're still learning with the BrewZilla, and actually during this mash we learned that dialing the power output of the element down to around about 30% means that you don't overshoot your mash temperatures as and when the BrewZilla decides that it needs to turn on the heating elements. We also had the pump set to around 30% and then walk away and leave it for an hour. After that time it was on to sparging, and I love this 2-step grain that allows you to lift the grain pipe halfway up. Now at this point I made sure to turn off the Bluetooth temperature probe and switch back to the main probe at the bottom of the BrewZilla. And I set this to 98 degrees so that whilst we were sparging, it was heating up to be just before the boil once we were done sparging. Now just before we hit a boil, we added our first charge of East Kent Goldings hops, gave it a nice stir, and then let the BrewZilla come up to a boil. We set our temperature goal on the BrewZilla to around about 103 degrees. That ensures that we get up to a nice rolling boil, and then if needs be, we can dial it back down a little bit after we've hit a boil. With 10 minutes left on the boil, we had our second dose of gorgeous Harlequin hops, and then after the boil, we chilled down to 80 degrees before adding our last hop addition for our whirlpool. We let this sit for around about 20 minutes before chilling further and then transferring over into a Grainfather conical fermenter. We added our 2 packets of Verdant IPA yeast, sealed the lid up, and we've left it alone until now.
So we've got to the end of it now, Rob. We are ready to try our English IPA designed by everybody that's been viewing this video, and I can't wait.
Actually, James, just before we jump in, we need to talk about fermentation.
Yes, yeah, I mean, actually there's not a huge amount to report. Both batches behaved very well, because obviously we've got the batch we brewed with the Verdant IPA yeast, and then the one that we brewed using the West Yorkshire Y yeast. They attenuated differently. So this finished, I think, at 1012, whereas the other finished slightly higher, okay? About 1014, actually. So we will get on to doing a bit of a taste sort of comparison shortly, but I can't wait to try this. So we fermented it until we hit a stable gravity. Then I dumped all of the yeast slurry from the bottom of the fermenter, moved on to clearing and cold crashing. Cold crashed for a few days, added some BrewZilla into the fermenter, let that clear, dumped any slurry and yeast again before we moved on to packaging into a keg and carbonating.
You also put BrewZilla in the keg, didn't you?
Yes.
Right, because what we've ended up with here is like almost polished.
Yes.
Like looks absolutely delicious.
Yeah, yeah.
And BrewZilla as a finings agent for homebrewers to use, I can't recommend it highly enough.
No.
And one of the great things about it is it's ready mixed, so you don't have to worry about mixing a powder, which can be quite difficult. And also the shelf life is so much longer, so you don't have to worry about that 8 weeks from mixing up. If you're using isinglass, it's just much more accessible for homebrewers.
Well, and it's vegan friendly.
Exactly.
Right? So a word on this. You touched on appearance. Now, I mean, it's a glorious colour, isn't it? It's not maybe as light as I was thinking we might have ended up with, but it's still a really inviting amber colour.
Deep golden colour, and I think I add in just that 5% of the crystal, of the Simpsons Heritage crystal in there. I think that's done an absolute superb job on the colour.
Yeah, and I mean the head subsided a little bit now because the beers have been poured for a few minutes, but the head is off-white as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's got a nice creaminess to it in terms of the colour.
Come on.
Yeah, cheers.
That's delightful. I like, as an experiment of what we've done here with the community choosing the recipe in separate sections as we've been going along, and then the community deciding what brewing system we're gonna use. What a fantastic experiment, and that beer is absolutely delicious. It's almost got some orangey and marmaladey kind of notes to it that some of the classic English bitters can demonstrate.
Yeah,
and
also,
it's bitter enough. It's like got
even like Tribute. You know, Tribute has that sort of marmaladey, orangey note to it, which I think is reminiscent in this pint.
I was thinking more down the Fuller's line. Not that this has got anything to do with anything that Fuller's do, yeast or grist or anything else, but it's got that kind of, it's got those notes to it that are manageable some more.
Yeah, I mean, let's get a little bit more analytical because, you know, I'm sure everybody viewing this is going to want to know. I mean, aroma-wise, we've got slight spice, you know, some nice sort of fruity sort of notes on there as well, and a little bit of citrus.
A bit of citrus, yeah. It's not pointing out in any one direction, is it? But it's definitely there.
It's sort of a well-balanced aroma, and then, you know, when you go in for a sip, it's crisp, you know, because this is attenuated well, and the water profile for an English IPA benefits that as well. There's a decent enough mouthfeel to it as well, but it's well balanced.
Yeah, it's not sort of cloying, is it? You could sink a lot of these. What percentage are we looking at?
It's like 5.6.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah. So you could get into some trouble if you stuck into it.
Lacing on the head, like really nice as well.
Yep.
Sticking to the
I think from a flavour perspective, you're getting the Maris Otter kind of maltiness punch through. Little hints of caramel from that Heritage Crystal malt. Still again orangey, kind of subtle citrus notes as well, which is probably being driven by that UK Cascade.
I would imagine. It's not toffee, is it? It's
No.
definitely the very, very lighter end of the sort of caramel spectrum. It's actually really Moorish. You could like a really.
I'm going to struggle
really
to not
bit.
finish the pint.
Yeah, I've got work to do. So
Yeah. I think to your point though, like it's an experiment in crafting like a modern interpretation of an English IPA. Wow, I'm super pleased with that. And it's a beer style that I've not got a huge amount of experience brewing. Well, should we try the West Yorkshire side by side, see how we get on?
Get on, yeah.
Here we go then, Rob. So we've got side by side. Now this was brewed, the main batch was brewed on the BrewZilla, and I had this just going in a G30 because I was obviously brewing 2 beers that day and it was just doing its thing.
Actually, as an experiment of 2 different brewing systems, brewing exactly the same grist at exactly the same time.
Yep.
Actually, that's quite a nice experiment as well. Ended up with exactly the same numbers at the end,
And
which is really interesting.
I mean, straight off the bat, you look at them and colour-wise is the same as well.
Absolutely exactly the same.
And the head colour's the same as well.
Yeah, exactly the same. Now, different yeast. So we've used the West Yorkshire yeast, so Y yeast.
Don't ask me the number.
No, this one's not dropped quite so pin bright.
No, but again, you know, it might in a couple of days. It's got brow soil in the keg as well.
Well, actually, no, there is a difference because this is being served out of a 20-litre ox bar where we're with the floating dip tube.
Yeah.
So it's dragging beer from the top. Actually, how long has this been kegged?
2 days.
2 days. So this is dragging beer from the top of the keg. This is in a standard corny keg. We're drawing from the very bottom of the keg.
Yeah.
I've got no hesitation to say that beer will drop absolutely pin.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, the head's the same colour. It's got that same like slight oranginess to it as well. But yes, the gravity was a couple of points higher on this one.
On the finishing gravity, yeah. So we're expecting more body.
Yeah. So let's go in for a smell first of all.
No, I'm tasting it, mate.
I think you've just done yourself a disservice because there is a distinct difference in the nose. That is malty and dry. That smells jammy and fruity.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Yeah. And that's fast forward to the taste, which is like what I've just done. You can absolutely, without a doubt, it's got a fuller body to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Less crisp.
Yeah.
Much less crisp. It's almost creamier.
Yeah.
It's got that creamier sort of
Texture.
well, I was going to say texture, yeah. It's almost got that creamier, and I hate the word mouthfeel because it just covers such a wide spectrum of what it is, but it is a descriptor.
Yep.
It's got a creamier mouthfeel to it.
And both were built with the same water profile, so this is literally down to attenuation.
Yeah.
You know, same water, same gravity, same grist.
Just what the yeast does and
Yep.
what the yeast gives.
And there is tons more fruit on the nose of this, which I definitely think is being driven by that yeast.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You know, as two same ingredients bar the yeast, these are separated by quite some margin.
Yeah.
We've got a beer that is absolutely crisp and crushable, yet full on in flavour. With this one, I wouldn't say that I could drink quite as much of this one because it's a bit more filling. It's got a bit more.
Yeah, the bitterness on the Verdant one punches through
Yeah, it
more
does.
because it's balanced with the gravity is obviously different
Yep.
to this one, right?
Yeah.
So the IBUs ultimately stand out more over here. Come on then, which is your favourite?
Do you know, as a drinking beer, I'm going down the pub and I want to share a few pints with mates, and it's this one.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Right?
it's absolutely that one because it's crushable. I could just keep on drinking that. However, this is something special.
Yeah.
This is something really special, and a couple of pints of that.
Sat round the fire at home.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think to your point, just completely distinguished by the yeast strains.
Yeah, I do. I do like that creamy texture that this has got. I do really like that. The distance apart is so much that possibly not two completely different beers, but that's highlighted just what the yeast brings to the party, and how you can change how a beer ends up, and the final product is absolutely fascinating. I love it.
Now, everybody, it is over to you because we want as many of you to have a go at brewing this beer as possible because ultimately you designed it. So the recipe kit is available. There's a link in the description below, but we've done it in a way so that the yeast is an optional product. So you can choose whether you want to brew it with West Yorkshire or with Verdant.
Or actually, you might have voted for a completely different yeast, and the choice is up to you. You're the brewer, you brew it exactly how you want. And actually, we'd be really interested to find out how you get on brewing this with a completely different yeast, because this grist and hop combination is absolutely outstanding.
So grab a recipe kit, get brewing, and then let us know your thoughts. So either come back to this video and drop a comment below, leave a review on the product page, or message us on socials, whatever you want. We want to hear how you found brewing this awesome English IPA.
But above all, a massive thank you to you all for putting this together, because this has been absolutely awesome.
Oh, it's great fun. I think actually, Rob, we do a lot of cool projects and we're very privileged to be able to play around with ingredients. But for me, this has been a real highlight.
Yeah, I mean, this is up there.
Absolute highlight.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, if you've made it to the end of the video and you're not already, please do subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Give this video a thumbs up. And if you have questions about this beer, anything that went along with it, or any other questions at all, hit us up in the comments section below. We will get back to you.
And of course, you can follow us on all of our other social channels. Cheers.
Have a great brew.